I recently beat Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm a huge Marvel fan. Not as huge as other people. I don't buy the comic books and stuff. I know I'm a casual. But I'm a huge fan of the MCU, specifically Guardians of the Galaxy. It is one of my favorite. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is my favorite MCU film, without a doubt. It is one of the best film experiences ever. I cannot hype it up enough. But I recently beat Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and to be honest, I expected more. I know it was a Square Enix game, and if you know the Square Enix with Marvel's history is anything to go by, my expectations were on the ground. Avengers, as we all know, was a less than favorable game, to be honest. They just kind of like missed the mark on that game. To this day, it still has a very negatively received by a lot of people, a lot of gamers, and I don't blame them. Honestly, Square Enix, I don't know what they were trying to do with Avengers, but they kind of missed the mark. But with Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, I think it was a little bit more straightforward, and that aspect of it being more straightforward, really helped Square Enix kind of make a decent game. It's a decent game. So first, let me go through the pros of the game. The story is really well thought out, and it expanded on the Guardians of the Galaxy universe quite well. It also does a great job at tying in with the movie storyline, although they are pretty much separate storylines because the way that things play out in the movies is kind of different than the way that they play out here in the game. But I'm not going to go too much into the story because there are spoilers in the game of what is coming up in the MCU films, but the way that they tied it all was immaculate. It was great. Like I know why Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy won an award for Best Narrative in the 2021 Game Awards, because it is a very well written game. The story is well thought out, as I've already said, and it's just all the characters are really charismatic. As much as people love to hate on them, a lot of people did not really like the voice acting. I really didn't mind it. It was pretty corny, of course, because it's more PG than the film, if that makes any sense. There's not a lot of like sexual innuendos as much as like in the films. The jokes kind of land, but they're a little more tame, in my opinion, than they are in the films, which it's okay. I get it, but I much prefer the writing on the films, obviously. The combat is actually pretty smooth, and it's actually very reminiscent of Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's kind of the same, in which you can tell your teammates what attacks to do. For example, in Final Fantasy Remake, if you're playing as Cloud, you can tell Barret to do something to either like heal you up. You can tell Tifa to attack the enemy and try and like get them, stun them or some sort, use an item or whatever. It's pretty much the same here, but in the difference here than with the how you actually use your characters, your sidekicks in Guardians of the Galaxy, is that in Guardians of the Galaxy you can control your sidekicks. You play the game in its entirety as Star-Lord. I don't know if that's a spoiler for you, but spoiler alert, you play the whole game as Star-Lord. You cannot play as Rocket. You cannot play as I was gonna call him Dave Bautista, Drax. You cannot play as any other of the characters, which is a shame, because I would love to feel what it is to be Groot, because I love Groot, man. Groot is my favorite MCU hero. He's just amazing. So that is kind of a shame, but at the same time, like, the attacks are really, they have kind of a strategic element to it. Some of them are actually crowd control attacks. Some of them are actually stun attacks, etc., etc. There's just a multitude of attacks that you can use from all your characters, of course. Like, that's the main draw to a Guardians of the Galaxy game. You got all these abilities under you because you're a team of super galactic crazy people, outcasts. So it's a fun game in that sense. And of course, as I already said, the characters are pretty likable and they are true to the series. Star-Lord is pretty much the same Star-Lord than in the films, in the comics. Drax is pretty much the same Dave Bautista that you see in the films. Gamora is pretty much the same, kind of like stuck up, but kind of like with a very soft spot sort of character. Like, she's really menacing, but at the same time, she's really kind of like vulnerable in a sense. Rocket, of course, you know, that raccoon, that space raccoon that really puts his heart out for his teammates. And of course Groot, just the neutral ass tree that everybody loves and is adorable for some reason. So it is pretty true to the stories that we've already seen on theaters, and I really do appreciate that. Even though some of the people didn't like the voice acting, I didn't mind it that much. It was all right. It wasn't the best, but what are you gonna do? Hire Chris Pratt? Come on now. Some of the cons for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is that the enemies are sponges, man. Like seriously, attacks can feel pretty useless at times because enemies just take bullets like nothing, especially since you're playing as Star-Lord. Most of your attacks are going to be with your guns, with your blasters, and honestly, man, some of these enemies just keep on taking damage and nothing happens. Most of the time you're going to defeat enemies by using your sidekicks, your team's attacks, rather than you as Star-Lord, which is a shame, I guess. And to be honest, I found myself using more melee attacks than actual blasters because, I don't know, they just felt a lot nicer, a lot better to connect than just shooting at random sponges. It just didn't feel good to shoot at enemies at times. Puzzles were extremely, I cannot emphasize just how simplistic these puzzles were, man. Some of them felt like an insult at times, just how simple they were. You know, to the point where it actually felt unnecessary to even include some of these puzzles. They felt like an obstacle rather than an accomplishment after solving them. Like they didn't add anything to the story. It just consisted of you either telling Gamora to like stick her sword to the wall so that you can climb up, and then there's a chest there, or there's something that you got to shoot at, and it's just that. There's no real complexity to some of these puzzles, and they just felt unnecessary at times, in my opinion. They felt like a chore rather than anything. Although the story was well written, the pacing could feel a little sluggish at times. I just didn't understand why sometimes you would have to come back to the Milano, to your spaceship, after like something big happened, when you could just like keep the story going. It just felt like, oh, now I gotta interact with some of these characters again. We all know what the next mission is. Like, there's no point in us being in the Milano at times, and I don't know, it just felt sometimes a little bit dragged down. This is my issue with a lot of like film games or games that are based off of stories that already exist in other mediums. If you already read the story, if you already seen the story, if you already know where the story's going, games can kind of feel like they extend, they drag the story just to fill the space of like what is acceptable for a game length. I feel they really kind of like stretched out the story just to really fit what could be fit in a 2-hour movie. This is a 10-15 hour game, so at times you can understand why it can feel a little bit sluggish at times. The decision-based mechanic doesn't seem to affect the outcome of anything. For example, there's certain puzzles that you got to solve by choosing one thing over the other. For example, there's the infamous gorge that you got to cross, and one of them is to throw Rocket, have Drax throw Rocket over the abyss for him to go to the other side and like hit a button or something. And if you don't choose to do that, Rocket, the game will prompt you and say like, Rocket will remember that you kind of defended him, but it doesn't add anything to the game. If anything, it changes some of the voice lines, but that's pretty much it. The decision-based mechanic just doesn't add anything, and I just don't understand why they added to it. You defending Rocket, you deciding to go with someone else's plan, and you know, making them feel good about their decision, just doesn't add anything besides a few voice lines. I may be wrong. I'm not the type of person who I'm not a completionist. I'm going to try and find every single ending, every single thing. Like, I'll just, once I beat the game, I look it up on YouTube and like look at all the endings and stuff. But it just felt like a very unnecessary and useless mechanic. Like, it was more of a gimmick than anything else. And, you know, yeah, I gave you some really funny voice lines, but that was pretty much it. Exploration is basically null, as the game is extremely linear. And even it kind of copies the same shimmy through a small crack to reach the next part of the level, as I like to call it, mechanic from Final Fantasy VII remake, which they were infamously known for. You know, that game is like 50% just you shimmying, seeing Cloud shimmy through a crack. That was pretty much it, the whole game. And Guardians of the Galaxy, Square Enix kind of implemented that same idea behind some of this to kind of make the world feel a lot bigger, or whatever you want, whatever their purpose was. It just felt really, I don't know, really cheap in my opinion. In conclusion, if you're a Marvel fan, you will enjoy this game. I enjoyed this game. It's a fun 15-hour game. It's pretty classic of a game, pretty linear game, so you'll mostly than anything, you'll just play it for the story. And to be honest, the story is pretty fun. It's a very stylish game. The music, the licensed music that is in the game is amazing. This is one of my favorite eras of music, so I really liked it a lot. However, I don't expect anyone to want to replay this game for a second time. Like, once you beat it, I'm sure you're gonna put it down and never pick it up again. If anything, you'll pick it up again in like 3-4 years if you're like nostalgic for a story that, you know, you can read in the comics or whatever. So it's yeah, if you don't mind too much simplistic puzzles, if you don't mind the lack of exploration, if you just want a single player linear experience and you're a Marvel fan, get this game. It's pretty cheap, I think, at this point. I think it's been discounted to hell. I got it for cheap. I basically got it for free because I had a gift card. So yeah, do as you will with that. But Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, I recommend it if it's discounted.